know a few people arriving. There are quite a few people arriving as I'm speaking, so we'll just wait for a few more seconds and allow some more people to join. Okay, hello everybody and welcome to this dissemination seminar for our new Climate Services Standard and Guidance. My name's Murray Dale and I'm a Technical Director at JBA Consulting and was the project manager for this commission that developed the standard and guidance we're talking about today. This is one of the main outcomes of a project that has lasted 2 years, and we're pleased to be able to present the standard and guidance that has emerged at the end of a long and broad consultation period. In this seminar, we've made available a facility for asking questions called Slido. To access Slido, go to slido.com and type in hashtag climate1 in capital letters, or use the QR code if you want to use your mobile phone, and this will enable you to engage with questions later. I'll speak a little bit more about that shortly. For your information, this seminar is being recorded and will be available afterwards online. Here is our agenda for today. After presenting information on the project and climate services and the standard and guidance itself, we will have time for a panel session when 4 of us will be available to answer questions you may have. The 4 panel members are Mark Harrison, Head of UK Applied Science at the Met Office, representing the sponsor for this work, and 2 colleagues from our team who work for Climate Sense and are experts in climate adaptation and standards development, having co-authored the ISO 14090 standard on climate adaptation, John Dora and Doogie Black. As I mentioned at the start of the call, if you would like to raise questions which we can answer in the session towards the end of the seminar today, please go to Slido. You can do this on your computer or via your mobile phone. If you go on your computer, you can type in hashtag climate1 and there will be an option to go to the Climate Services Standards meeting where you can add your name and affiliation if you wish, which may help with answering some of the questions. You'll be able to see other people's questions here and can upvote questions that you like by clicking the thumbs up icon if you see a question that you think you would like asked as well, or you can add your own questions. I'm going to hand over now to Mark Harrison of the Met Office to provide some background to the wider UK climate research programme.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Maury. So I'm conscious that there may be some people in the audience today who aren't familiar with the UK Climate Resilience Programme. So I thought I'd spend a couple of minutes describing the programme as a whole. The UK Climate Resilience Programme has been funded through the Strategic Priorities Fund and operationalised through the Met Office and UKRI. It started at the very end of 2018 and runs through to the end of this financial year. Its vision is to enhance the UK's resilience to climate variability and change through frontier interdisciplinary research and innovation on climate risk, adaptation and services, working with stakeholders and end users to ensure the research is useful and usable. So there's loads of information on the web page, and there's also a YouTube channel where seminars such as this have been recorded. So if you're interested and would like to learn more, then I encourage you to dip into some of these resources. Have the next slide, please. Thank you. So the Met Office side of the programme has been broken down into 4 different work packages, which take us from hazard to risk. So work package 2A is very much focused on improving climate hazard information. Work package 2B is focused on developing techniques to go from hazard to risk. Work package 3 is all about testing this out with pilots for a range of sectors, with work package 4 being around improving the environment in which climate services are developed in order to accelerate uptake. It's this last work package that this project sits in. So in work package 4, we've commissioned this project. We've also been looking at how we go about valuing climate services, as well as considering the merit of developing a UK national framework for climate services and thinking through what form this might take. So just before I hand back to Maury, I'd like to thank the team who've been running this project. Their approach has been highly iterative and have engaged over the course of the last 18 months or so with an impressive range of stakeholders. Inevitably, we haven't been able to engage with absolutely everybody. So this seminar comes at the end of the project, and it's very much intended to be a dissemination of our work as opposed to inviting comments for further iteration. However, as we go through the seminar, could you give some thought as to how you might engage or use the output that has been created? The final document is published on the UKCR web pages and also will be on the Met Office web pages. We're currently exploring ways for organisations to register their commitment, confirming that they will agree to use the standard provided on a voluntary basis. So we'd be really interested and keen to hear from you in that way. So back to you. Thanks, Maury.
Thank you very much, Mark. That's very helpful. I wanted to mention a bit about the premise for the project and why we've been involved in this over the last 2 years. Climate services are a critical component of adaptation. Decision makers are often dependent upon the insight of specialist climate service providers to understand their hazards, vulnerabilities, and exposure, then to turn that understanding into effective action. So a well-functioning climate service can help society be more resilient to climate and future climate threats, current and future climate threats. Central to the project approach that we took was to have a focus on both the user as well as a provider of climate services. Climate services standards need to facilitate and support user needs, effectively engaging the user within the current capacity, whether they be a novice or deeply experienced. So we've kept in mind that we need to focus on these 2 groups right from the outset. If you're maybe new to this term climate services, perhaps it would help to have a definition. There are a number of definitions that have been circulating in recent years, and there's quite a bit of research focus on this in the last few years. We settled on this definition in this project, where we say that climate services involve the production, translation, transfer, and use of climate knowledge and information in climate-informed decision-making. So it's a very broad definition, and there can be many examples of services, be they tools or forms of information, that add value to raw climate information and data and projections, and can be then turned into some form that aids decision making. So a key element in the definition is this decision making part. So the information that's within the climate service and the output from it enables decisions to be taken and supported by all sorts of users. And here's an example of a few potential users with perhaps a UK focus in this case. How might temperature change affect UK disease patterns in the health sector? When will I be able to consider new crop types for the agricultural sector, which could just be an individual farmer or could be a larger group? For an energy sector and an energy provider, how much solar energy can we expect to get in this area in the future? For a responder to emergencies, will our response to heavy rainfall events need to be more frequent? And for water utilities and water provision, will we need to restrict start restricting the use of water more, and these decisions can be informed by good quality climate services. The climate services we're looking at as well are ones which are not exclusive to just adaptation, but they may involve decisions for planning in near real-time operation as well as long-term adaptation, and they can be related to mitigation services, so those that help inform decisions to be made about greenhouse gas mitigation and reducing the impacts of climate change. If we then move on to the need for a standard or a guide to assist with climate services, this is a new area across the UK and globally, even though there's been a lot of discussion about climate services recently. So we recognise that there are 8 key benefits that a climate services standard or guide might have, and those are those which are listed on the screen now. As you can see, these benefits relate not just to quality of services, but also to aspects such as accessibility, accountability, and improved collaboration, and even consider aspects to do with ethical considerations so that there is equitable access, for example, to climate services. So there can be a lot of benefits to having a standard, or as we've called this now, a standard stroke guide, which can help both those providing climate services as well as those using climate services. And our document that we'll refer to shortly is focused on both those groups. These statements are available in the standard document itself if you haven't had time to read them, and we'll show you where you can access the document towards the end of this seminar. I wanted to thank a lot of groups who've been involved through consultation in this project. Those shown on screen, largely UK focused, but not exclusively, and we're especially grateful to those groups from Canada who were able to input to this. These organisations kindly responded to our calls to get involved in discussion workshops over the last 2 years. So we thank them all very much, and their representatives who committed their time. Many more organisations than those shown on the previous slide have been made aware of the standard and guidance and provided contributions to its development. So there's a list of those here, and these do stretch across the world to a number of organisations, some of which you may be representing in your groups today. So we also thank them very much, and for all those who provided comments on the earlier drafts, which we'll be talking about shortly. So I want to hand over now to my colleague John Dora, who's a director at Climate Sense and who worked with us to develop the standard and guidance. And John, over to you to give us a bit more detail. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Murray and Mark, for the introductions. I'm John Dora, Director at Climate Sense, and having worked in the standards field for a number of years, I was really pleased to help put this document, the standard stroke guidance, together. If I could have the next slide, please. I'm just going to go through the evolution of the standard and some of the points in the contents, but we drafted this standard in a traditional sort of standards development process, which I've used with British standards and CEN-CENELEC in Europe and international standards ISO. And we started with an initial draft, which was circulated among our stakeholders. We had a working draft 1, working draft 2, a working draft 3, then a final version. It looks like there were 4 iterations, but I've just checked my notes. I think we actually had about 7 documents that we used, and internally we worked on 1 or 2 and refined them before we issued them to our stakeholders. the stakeholders saw 4 draft documents. The first one was mainly a very long, comprehensive document that was mainly requirements with a scoring system. But when that went out on consultation, British Standards suggested actually in this area being a sort of emerging, almost emerging market for climate services, it's probably better to have guidance and to focus on what good looks like. So we changed the initial draft, cut it down drastically to the working draft 1, and worked through that, converging on what is now available online, that Murray will be giving details as to how to access it later. In the convergence, we had a lot of debate, a lot of discussion, and over 600 comments from volunteers who helped us out with the feedback and comments on the principles that were used in the actual document. So I think that was a pretty good, robust process, looking at the number of consultees and stakeholders that Murray pointed out in the previous slide. British Standards offered us a contents list, which we built upon after we started off with a rather complex first draft. So the working draft had a contents list, which looks like what's on the next slide. And this contents list here looks very much like a normal sort of European or international or typical standard, with lots of guidance in it, with some key requirements, some key clauses that use the word shall, which are requirements. Again, I repeat that this was built around what good looks like, and these are the contents. Now, I have some notes about the contents. The introduction talks about the purpose, and the forward talks about the purpose. So we know what the document's about and where it fits, and the context includes, how it's around climate services for users and providers of climate services. We have a set of principles, which is the normal standards section, as well as terms and definitions. We talked about internal and external climate services, and we recognize the fact that organizations, companies, businesses that sometimes offer climate services, so they're providing climate services maybe to an external client, sometimes have to take climate services on board as well from other places. So they're kind of an internal climate service provider and an provider of climate services to outside organizations. So we've tackled these sorts of ideas. And we've very much talked about having collaboration between the climate service provider and climate service user in specifying the relationship and the coverage. So the provider needs to make clear what service they provide, its limitations and strengths, to ensure that its audience, the user, receives the most appropriate data for a particular assignment or need. Now, these could follow ISO 14090 communication type requirements, and sort of they're set out in 1490. And it talks about a contractual discussion in collaboration to co-produce the specification for the service. And we also sort of covered the fact that this might need to be iterative and might change over time as the client understands more, the user understands more, and they require an evolution of that service. So communication, collaboration are key points within the standard. There's chapters on data sources, where to find data, validating data, time frames, time scales, uncertainty, and communication there, so as the user and provider understand what they mean by uncertainty. Then there's a chapter on methods and approaches that can be used, accessibility, and making sure that users who might not be able to understand all the concepts, and users who have different languages or learning needs are able to engage with the provider in such a way that collaborative development of the service means that a good service fit for purpose is delivered. And there's a short piece on benchmarking services. At the end of the actual document, we've got a couple of annexes that give case studies showing how the standard and guidelines have been used or could be used. So it shows some real life examples where the clauses in the standard actually fit in. Then there's, as you'd expect, the bibliography and acknowledgements to the vast number of people and organizations that helped us put this all together. So the next slide, Murray, I think shows that we, more or less what I've just said, the alignment between provider and user, the external internal service providers, and the collaborative approach being essential. But the other thing I wanted to add to this was that we really hope that this standard is adopted at a much wider level, and my hope is we push for adoption at international level with ISO, using our friends from British Standards to help us with that process. That's something that needs to be discussed with the client, the Met Office and UKRI in due course. But the main thing is this document is out there now and people can start using it, which is really, really helpful in my view. On the next slide, I just show a little bit of the form we used to gather or collate comments. Stakeholders had a copy of one of the working drafts. They provided comments on a form like this that targeted line numbers, and they made comments and made suggestions for different text, and we responded. Dougie Black, who'll be in the panel later on, is here as well. Dougie and I went through every individual comment and made sure that we could make sense of that comment and adjust or not adjust the standard as necessary. And all these comments have been registered in a spreadsheet. So if anybody wonders why we said this and not that, it's all there. And of course, one of the challenges in drafting standards is that you might end up with conflicting comments, and we hope that we've addressed those as well to find a good compromise. The drafts were edited based on these comments, and then we issued the final version a couple of weeks ago when we tweaked it and built in the case studies that I mentioned earlier. So on the next slide, which I think is my last slide, we had a meeting of our sort of core group a few weeks ago where we signed off the standard as a practicable, usable document. It's may not be 100% perfect nor ideal, but with standards, this is the first one of its kind. It's good enough to be used. It's better to be broadly in the right area than perfectly wrong. So it's fit for purpose. It's been through this consultation process. Sorry, somebody's ringing me up. But we've done this through consensus, months of consultation. Every comment, like I said, has been taken into consideration. And like I said, there's a couple of case studies, worked examples for applying the standard in the annexes there. So thank you, Murray. I think that's my quick run through over the process and the content of the document.
Thank you very much, John. That's very good. We have now got some time for any of the 4 members on the panel to respond to questions you may have. So if you haven't had a chance yet to operate this method for posting questions, then please feel free to put forward any comments or questions in the Slido facility that you can use either with your mobile phone or on your computer. I think if you use the computer, you can put forward your name and organization, but either method works fine. So if you have any questions about the standard that's been developed and anything that John has said or Mark, then please feel free to put that forward. I see that one has come in so far. I appreciate it may take a little bit of time to get on there and to write your questions.
How would you like us to answer these, Murray? Sorry, it's Dougie here. My apologies for being a little late. I got left in a waiting room, but luckily Emma called me in. I don't know what waiting room I was in.
Thank you,
But
Dougie.
would you like us to answer these questions as they come up? I can see them appearing
Yes,
on
I
the
think
app.
we need to probably give people a little bit of time to write their questions, and then there is this opportunity in Slido that if you don't have a question but you like someone else's question, that you can just click the thumbs up icon and that will upvote that question. But on hand we've got two of our colleagues, Emma and Silale, who are ready to let us know which of those questions is coming up forward or highest. The one that I'm seeing on my screen so far that has 2 votes is, as a standard, what industries are you looking to target? So I don't know if John or Dougie you'd like to have a go at that.
Yeah, I don't mind having a go. John, are you pointing at me, John?
I'm pointing at you, yeah, where you are on my screen, yes.
Okay. So it's a great question, actually. And so one of the things in the evolution that John was talking about of how the standard got to where it got to was in the different iterations, we swung between services providers and services users, climate service providers and climate service users. And actually, we went too far in each direction on a few of them. So that's why the whole idea of consensus to try and get that best middle ground that we can find is so important. And it's that user, the standard user, the service user, sorry, component that I think is the one that your question relates to most. It's like, you know, who is the target sector? It also goes on to the next question there. It's about do you need to consider sector specific requirements? And it's that engagement with the standard provider and the user that starts to create that common ground that can become sector specific, because it's the standard is supposed to be used by any organization who's looking at climate services. It's that component of co-development or working together or understanding where people are coming from that achieves the sector specific stuff, so that the service that's been provided can be tailored and sculpted to target whatever the use phase is, you know, the useful use is. And so that's what the standard's trying to achieve, is that communication between the two in order to achieve that.
Thank you, Dougie. In answer also to this first question about which industries are we looking to target, I think there was no intention to be specific with any particular industry at all. There are clearly, in the UK, there are sectors who are doing a lot, such as the water sector, water utilities sector for water resources, flood risk, urban pollution management, who are one sector that are very keen on using climate services. But these guidelines and standard are not aimed at any specific sector, and all sectors can have a go at making use of it. We imagine that certain sectors will be catching up with other sectors that have been quite advanced in using climate services, and so we hope that the future of this over the next few years may be that it becomes more useful to a really big wide range of sectors. John or Mark, do you have any comments on this?
I think you've covered it, Maury. Through the iterative process of developing this, we cast a pretty wide net. So it was not targeting any particular sector or industry, and we'd hope that it's sufficiently generic, or it can be interpreted for different use cases.
Yeah,
this is also why we'd quite like to hear from people in terms of whether or not they've adopted it, how they've adopted it. Looking down the list, you can see there are a few questions in terms of how might this evolve. It will inevitably evolve, and you know, maybe John or Dougie can elaborate a little bit in terms of the standard review process. But it clearly won't stay static indefinitely. It will always evolve, but this is very much our first cut. We think covers most of the bases.
Yeah, I can add to that. In terms of review, this standard is going to be made available via a link, and we're willing to take comments on the standard, but there isn't any sort of process in place for reviewing this. This is a one-off commission to produce this document, but as I mentioned earlier, if we can push it through the ISO system or the BSI system, if it becomes a supported standard from a standards body, then there will be a formal review process, and the sort of thing that might happen there is that it could become an ISO guidance that could be reviewed in due course in some years as these things mature. The other thing I would add is, because it's a mixture of requirements and guidelines, people can use the guideline parts to follow the sort of principles, but don't have to follow the letter of what's recommended. So there's that sort of neat standards philosophy, if I can call it, of having requirements covered by the shall word, recommendations covered by the should word, and may and can as sort of lower order guidelines as to what you can do. So it's not something that could be used in a way that you have to follow the recommendations. You can depart from those, but of course it's the basis for people to take forward and use in that sort of negotiation between climate services provider, climate services user, to agree between themselves what sort of level of service, what sort of quality is appropriate.
Thank you, John. One thing we haven't mentioned is that the standard and guidance also includes 2 worked examples at the back of it in the annexes, which will hopefully be of use for people to see how you could apply a climate service through this guidance and standard against some of the requirements and some of the recommendations. As I mentioned, with the sector-specific element, those 2 examples, one is related to UK flood risk, the other is related to an urban pollution management tool. So they are both water sector examples, with that sector being quite advanced. But that doesn't mean, of course, that there aren't climate services which are being applied in all sorts of sectors. It's just that those were 2 where we found there were examples that could be used that might be helpful. There are some more good questions coming in. Someone's pleased to see that the ethical aspects are captured, and that's been upvoted, so that's nice to see and nice to read. If there anything further you wish to pick up on that, please do so. Are there some quick wins to get this adopted? Mark, I wonder if it's a good time for you to mention, following what John's just been saying, and Doogie, that you have a plan for a mechanism to record usage of this document. Is that something you can talk about for a minute?
Yeah, thanks, Maury. Yeah, so just building on what John Dora mentioned a few minutes ago, the standard is available through the UK Climate Resilience webpage. We're looking to also put it on the Met Office webpage, and on both of those web pages we'd like to have some sort of form or some method of people registering their interest and highlighting where they signed up to it, the standard, or how they've used it. So we're looking to develop a greater understanding of how people are using it in that way. In terms of what happens next and quick wins, we're starting to think about what happens next. Again, as John said, this was a one-off commission, and the next phase is for us to consider whether or not there would be benefit in this being adopted as a BSI standard or through another organisation. There'll be pros and cons associated with that, but that's kind of where we are at the moment, and that's where we are with our thinking.
Thanks, Mark. There's a question, a good point about standards creating a snapshot in time. Yet climate services is still a fluid, maturing landscape, and we still evolve. How does a standard fit in this context? To some extent that's been talked about, but I think it's a good, maybe worth, if you could say a bit more, John, perhaps, or Doogie, about how standards that you've been involved with do evolve over time and the mechanism for that?
Well, that's a really good question, because this is something that cropped up in our series of discussions with stakeholders. And we've actually got a section in the standard that talks about aligning timeframes to climate service users' needs, which talks about the changing needs over time. So, we're talking about the provider and user working collaboration to determine the timeframes. So there's not only the timeframes in terms of what the user needs in looking at the future climate, but also we're looking at the sort of climate service users' desires to understand more. And there's somewhere else, I'm just looking at my copy of it. There's somewhere else I'm trying to find where we talked about the co-design of the service, recognizing that the user might want more information as they actually become more mature and understanding of the issues around climate change. So we kind of got in mind that at some stage the standard will be evolving and changing, but we've also written into the document about how the user will understand more and their needs might change, and that needs to be addressed in terms of the relationship and the baseline and growing capacity with the user as time goes on. So we kind of try to address that. Doogie might have something to add to that. I don't know, Doogie.
Not too much, John. I think you covered most of it there. For me, the fluidity and the evolution, so they've got the iterations of the standard itself, reviewing it at regular intervals and different processes of getting it higher up. But to keep the standard alive so that it can be productive between those periods of review, it's that process of iteration again between the user and the provider, where as the user needs change, we recognize that users of climate services, as they engage with information and they engage with data, they're on a journey of improvement themselves. Now, that could be an individual, that could be an organization, but as they get better at using the information, they tend to need different types of information. And so that fluidity about how needs change and keeps up with how the service provider is keeping on top of the different evidence and data and information that comes along. So the whole standard is actually designed to take in a lot of fluidity of how things evolve. That's how people's needs for the information evolve and how different information becomes available. But if there's any big step changes, we would hope to pick them up in the revision cycles.
Thank you, Doogie. There's a nice question about how we would see this being picked up by users in the global south, and how would this apply perhaps for poorer countries. The remit for the project was to create a document that was applicable for UK services, climate services, but a lot of UK-based services are for other countries, and there are examples such as seasonal forecasts that are produced by the Met Office for the aid sector, carrying out work in developing countries. But of course, the standard could well be taken up and used for international purposes. There hasn't been anything written in the document that makes it overly UK specific, apart from the two worked examples. I think it's fair to say that the document could be applied internationally for a range of climate services, because it's talking about principles about how the users and providers engage, and how to make sure that quality is checked, and how to make sure the climate service outputs are accessible, and so on. So those are all things which could well be picked up and made applicable right across the world, indeed in developing countries as much as in the global north, if you like. I don't know if you want to add anything on that, John, Doogie.
I think that just about covers it, Murray. There is a participatory approach to the standard, again, between this interface between the provider and the user, and I think that works well in developing economies and transition economies as well. I think a lot we've learned a lot from the pace of change that can go on in those countries, and it's that participatory approach that creates that rapid change, and this reflects it. So it's almost like we've learned from the global south often in terms of how you can adopt climate services into action.
The only thing I would add to what's been said is that if I can just say that we've drafted the document, we're making it available. Everybody is encouraged to take a look at it and adopt it. It can't be forced upon anybody, but I don't know of any similar document across the world that tackles this area of provision of climate services. I mean, there was a worry, a concern I came across a few years ago, that with the climate service providers being seen across the globe as something we need, that if we didn't have some sort of benchmark they could work to, you wouldn't have everybody working to the same sort of standards. So I think it was a case that if we get something like this that people start to use it and specify it and monitor what's going on, it's going to make sure that we have quality information, quality services provided to people that need them most. But to do that, organizations, consultancies, governments, businesses need to pick up this document and promote it. And this is why one of the reasons we're doing this seminar, to promote the fact that it's there. There's nothing like it, as far as I know, in terms of user and provider guidelines and requirements available. This is the first one, so it might not be perfect, but it's usable. And I think, if we start using it and learning and feeding back, we can only improve. But it needs people like some of you who are on this this call to pick it up and promote it and use it and see how well it fits. It's covered, I think, probably most, if not all, the points that I can see coming up in the questions. But then I'm bound to say that, I think.
There was a question that's been around for a bit about the involvement of how it's involved professional bodies. The Royal Meteorological Society, the Royal MetSoc, to some of us who are meteorologists, has been involved in the process from the outset and have input in some of the versions of the drafts that we've had. Of course, there are other professional bodies, civil engineers, for example, all sorts of others that might find this useful. So as John said, we hope that people will know it's there, will start to look at it, and we'll see how they might be able to use it and consider adopting it or adopting elements of it that might be helpful to them. There's also a question that I've noticed from Kay from the Environment Agency. Lots of practitioners are both providers and users. How does the guidance treat this audience? Well, we have, partly because we've tried to involve both groups in the stakeholder engagement period over the last 2 years. We have been quite careful to try and make sure that both of these groups are dealt with, and the standard guidance benefits both. So obviously, if you're commissioning climate services, you want to have trust in that service, that it's doing the right thing, it's using appropriate data, it's meeting your needs. But as a user of the, so that's the person using it and commissioning the service, but as the provider, there's an onus on that provider to try and be transparent about the information that's been used, and this key point about engaging with users so that the process right from the concept design of the climate service involves the user in that concept before the service is actually starting to be developed, and maintains that relationship throughout. So there's been a lot of onus on that. Are there other points which my colleagues want to refer to on the questions that are coming up. Or if Emma or Silale, if you notice any which we have skipped through but would be deserving of a haven't been addressed, please point those out to us.
I think this question, sorry, go ahead, Marie.
Yeah, no, sorry, carry on, Emma.
I was going to say this question here, standards create a snapshot in time, yet climate services is still a fluid, maturing landscape and will still evolve. How does the standard fit in this context? That question's very interesting, if anyone has any thoughts on that one.
I think we did pick that up partially.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah. There's one from Asan Lira St. Clair from DMV. Do you think one guidance document or one standard takes care of all the possible criteria and requirements associated with high quality climate services? Well, that would be nice if it's possible. We certainly aim to try to do that, but clearly I think as things evolve in this, as John said, it's a very much an emerging area with no standards in the past to look at. So we're starting from scratch, and we would see that document could start to become have elements that are applicable to specific sectors. But I think at the moment we wanted to keep it as a broad church as possible and to enable all sectors to be able to benefit from it.
If I can just say a thing about that as well, the notion of having a standard that specifies lots of detail, we kind of went away from that very early on, because this has to be necessarily a high level kind of framework that organizations that know their topics, service providers that know that the services they provide need to have the dialogue with the organizations that need the services, and we couldn't get down to that detail. It may be as things evolve, and I've seen this happen with ISO 14090 on adaptation to climate change. It may be as things evolve over time that sector-specific guidelines might be desired, and people would be quite, if this became a British standard or an international standard, then the process for developing those standards is for people to volunteer there's a need for something and propose that to somebody like a body like BSI, and if enough people say yes, there's a need for it, then another document gets drafted. So it could be that in time there might be sector specific or topic specific documents that are drafted underneath this overall framework that we put into this document, and that's happened with ISO 14090. There's 14091, which looks at impact, risk, and vulnerability, and there's a planning guide for local authorities as a sort of document that sits under 1490 and explains more with guidelines for adaptation planning for local authorities. But this is where I come out with my usual plea to people on the call. The field of adaptation standards is something that we seem to be seeing more of a need for. But if you're interested in getting involved in standards development, do speak to people like British Standards or your national standards body. I integrated and work quite a bit with international standards. There are not enough adaptation experts stepping up to help out with drafting adaptation standards. This is one that we've done through the UK funding, but there are a few adaptation needs that need people to volunteer to help out with them. Sorry, Murray, I'm diverting us away from the topic. This is an area, though, it's not meant to be a sector-specific document. It's broad across everything, and organisations, as they engage with each other to develop services and procure services, I would like to think would have that dialogue to specify exactly what's needed for each other. Sorry, I went on too long.
Okay, John, thanks. Well, we've got 10 minutes till we need to finish, and we want to finish on time. We've got a few items to talk about at the end, but just before we finish with this, there's a 6 voted question saying the UK implemented a national framework of climate services a few years back following WMO guidelines. Is this part of that effort? If not, how aligned are both? So the short answer I would say is yes, it is collaborating with that project. So Mark from the Met Office may be able to say a bit more about the national framework, but we've worked with the team leading that national framework, well, leading the project to determine whether a framework was something that is required in the UK, and I think the outcome was it is, and there are significant benefits of it. It exists in other countries, South Africa being one example. So that national framework has an element within it related to standards, and we hope very much that the document we've produced will be informing in that framework. Mark, did you want to add anything on the NFCS?
Yes, thanks, Maury. Yeah, I was just going to say I can see both Natalie Garrett and Nicola Golding on the call as well, and they're the team that are leading on the national framework project that also forms part of this work package 4, which is all about how to accelerate the uptake of and use of climate services. So yes, that project has been collaborating closely with the standards project we're talking about today.
Thanks. A question about the stakeholder context. I appreciate a number of people attending today may not have been involved in this project to date. We can only apologise for that, but we have cast quite a wide net over the last 2 years. Over 200 people were sent a version of the document earlier this year to make them aware of it. And we've had involvement from a lot of actors already. So I think we have made quite wide efforts to involve stakeholders, both in terms of the user community and the provider community of climate services. And there's a list of the organisations that have been involved in this slide deck, which will be available on the recording. A question here about co-production of climate information rather than a linear supply chain modality. I think that's leading towards this, what we would call co-X. I think Roger Street calls this whole concept. So you're involving in co-design, co-production, and sort of co-monitoring. I think, sorry, Roger, if I'm misinterpreting the various codes, but essentially this means that there's this symbiotic relationship between those who are using services and those who are providing them that starts right at the design of services before there any sort of outputs are produced. And in that way, we're very much trying to encourage that in this standard. So there are requirements actually to demonstrate that you as a provider are engaging with that user community throughout as much as you can. Obviously, it's a best endeavours requirement, but it's trying to encourage that behaviour. I'm talking quite a lot, so if any of the other three want to make any comments on that or any of these other questions that are on screen, please do so, and then we'll probably need to wrap up fairly soon. Sorry, yep, go on, Doogie.
I was just going to answer the question, how did you manage the consensus building process for the definition of climate services? That was quite a large discussion at the beginning of the project, because we had a number of different variations of what climate services were. But in answering the question previously that Murray, I think you handled it with Kay's question about some users become providers. The the original sort of look at climate services was saying, okay, you get climate services that provide the information, or you even get data before the information, and then you get information before you get those that are using the information to develop actions. But some of those actions are actually the provision of that information in different formats. So the user becomes the provider. And so there is definitions that sit within the standard that explain the difference between user and provider. And when the user becomes a provider, they take a different look at it. So the definition for climate services, although we've reached consensus on what a user and a provider is, it should be able to accommodate all of those that are interfacing with climate information.
Thank you, Dougie. Just on this point about adaptation and mitigation, we did have this come up in the development of the document, and we do see this being able to be applied in both adaptation and mitigation services, or services to assist in those two areas. I think we may have to move towards finalising now, so I do thank you very much, and apologies if you haven't had your question asked. We did say we would tell you where the standard stroke guidance can be downloaded from, and it is on the UKCR web page. Mark showed the web link for the whole programme. Within that are a set of projects, and you can find this project, Climate Services Standards and Value, and at the base of that page there is a download link for the document, a 36-page PDF document as shown on the right of that screen. So do feel free to download that. That's been available since yesterday. I wanted also just to make reference to another part of this project, because we've talked purely about the standard and guidance today, just so that people on this call are aware. There is also an element in this study that is looking at how climate services can be valued, which is a way of being able to compare services. So you can potentially see whether one service has a greater value than another. Now that's not an easy thing to do, and 3 or possibly even 4 case studies are being produced, which will shortly be made available in a report later this year, that look at how climate services can be valued. So looking at a methodology for this and how this could apply with different types of services, whether they be for adaptation or so using future long-term projections, or even for using historic observed data or seasonal forecast services. So there's
sorry, just to let you know, you're not sharing your screen anymore. If you had a slide for this, thank you.
Thank you, that's appreciated. Apologies. So this is the page which you can find about valuation of services. This is on the blog, which you can find on that same UKCR web page, and there, if you're interested in the valuation part, then please do look at that, and something will be put online, we anticipate, in the next few weeks. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge the Met Office and UKRI for funding this work, which we're very grateful. And I'd also like to make a big thank you to the whole project team who's worked on this with me and John and Dougie. So Rachel Nye, Emma Brooke, Silale Menezes, Paul Watkins, Alistair Hunt, Rob Wilby and Becky Venton, who were expert advisors to us, and John and Dougie, of course, who are here today. So I do thank them all very much, and it's been a combined effort, and we do hope very much that you'll find the document useful, and as Mark said, there should hopefully be some facility for making comments on that and its uses. Mark, there's a minute left if you would like to add anything.
Just to thank yourself, Maury, for organising this, and the rest of the team for your work over the last couple of years. And yes, just to encourage people to take a look, download the document of the UK Climate Resilience webpage, and in due course we'll get some sort of way of capturing those organisations that wanted to pledge or sign up to use or consideration of the standard. So look out for that in future. just remains to say thanks everyone for attending. It's been great to see so many people, albeit virtually. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you all. Thank
Thank
you
you.
for your questions. You have a good rest of the day.